talk to you about something.
Baby, I know what you want to talk to me about. And I don't want you to apologize for it, because love means never having to say that you're sorry. Do you know what I mean?
For years, Hollywood fans thought they knew everything about Reese Witherspoon and Vince Vaughn. After all, they were America's unlikely comedy duo in the hit movie 4 Christmases Smiling on Red Carpets, delivering interviews full of laughter and insisting that their on-screen chemistry was the real deal. But behind every dazzling photo was a truth almost no one outside their private circle ever knew. Rumors swirled instantly after filming, rapped that the pair clashed on set, that Reese walked away angry, that Vince refused to compromise, and that their tension was so intense. Studio executives feared the movie might collapse before release, but no one dared to confirm anything. Years passed, questions faded, and the truth slipped into Hollywood silence. Until now, only recently have insiders, former colleagues, and Reese herself begun speaking about what really happened between the two. And the picture they paint is shocking. Two actors with wildly different worlds colliding, damaging each other in ways neither expected. The feel-good Christmas movie hides a story of hurt pride, disrespected boundaries, broken trust, and painful lessons both stars carried into adulthood. Today, the truth is resurfacing, piece by piece, and it reveals why Reese Witherspoon refuses to work with Vince Vaughn again, and why Vince still avoids the topic entirely. What happened wasn't simple drama. It changed their lives forever. When Reese Witherspoon signed on for 4 Christmases, she entered the project with the kind of optimism most actors lose after decades in Hollywood. She was fresh off a long run of critically praised roles, with a Best Actress Oscar under her belt, a spotless reputation, and a public image carefully built on kindness and professionalism. For Reese, this film wasn't just a paycheck. It was a chance to prove she could master comedy on a grand scale, and she took the opportunity seriously. Standing across from her on that first day of rehearsals was Vince Vaughn, a towering, charismatic powerhouse who carried decades of improvisational comedy in his blood. He was quick, loud, spontaneous, unpredictable, and beloved. Vince rarely followed scripts word for word. He trusted instinct and chaos to pull out magic. When cameras rolled, he came alive like a wildfire dot. So, from the public's view, it should have been a match made in movie heaven, a disciplined, detail-focused award winner paired with a loose comic genius. But that contrast, while exciting to fans, was the very thing that planted the first seeds of disaster. Behind closed doors, Reese arrived on set each morning, tightly prepared, pages highlighted, emotional beats memorized, dialogue rehearsed like theater. Vince arrived casually with his script folded in the back pocket of his jeans, confident he could and would change almost anything right there on the spot. At first, Reese tried to embrace the difference. She liked the challenge, the unpredictability, the humor that burst out of his ad-libbed lines. But, as filming continued, the improvisations stopped feeling playful. Vince's spontaneous changes started stepping directly over her rehearsed timing, ruining emotional beats she had carefully crafted. Every time he reshaped a scene, it forced her to rethink her lines mid-take. It rattled her focus, and soon the tension became visible. Crew members noticed it first. Those quiet, shared glances as Vince cracked jokes mid-scene while Reese's jaw tightened. One cinematographer later said the energy in the room dropped every time something unexpected happened, because everyone knew how frustrated she was becoming. Reese wasn't just annoyed. She felt disrespected. Actors like her lived off preparation, and she couldn't understand why Vaughn wouldn't meet her halfway. The conflict reached a silent boiling point during one specific sequence. Reese had worked for days on the emotional flow of a tense argument scene that the director described as the emotional heart of the movie. When cameras rolled, she fell into the moment exactly as she had rehearsed, voice breaking, eyes welling up, pacing slow and intentional. Then Vince tossed in 3 unscripted jokes that cut through the seam like knives, turning her vulnerable moment into comedy. The director yelled cut. Reese stayed frozen, staring at Vince as if she didn't recognize the person in front of her. Crew members remembered that expression. It was hurt, anger, and disbelief in one look. Later that afternoon, Reese requested a closed-door meeting with the director and producers. She didn't threaten to quit, she didn't yell, but she did insist on boundaries. She explained that Vince's improv made it impossible for her to deliver the emotional work she promised the studio. She asked them to speak to him or modify their approach. She needed structure, she needed clarity, and she needed respect. But Vaughn didn't respond well to being told to rein in his instincts. Friends say he felt controlled, boxed in by someone trying to smother his creative process. He believed comedy thrived in chaos, and for someone to restrict him felt like betrayal. What began as creative disagreement turned into personal resentment on both sides. Every day after that meeting felt heavier. Reese and Vince barely spoke between scenes. They didn't laugh together during lighting resets. They avoided eye contact at table readings. The atmosphere became tense enough that background actors whispered about it in holding rooms. Hollywood would eventually try to bury the story, hoping fans would never learn how close the movie came to falling apart. But the first cracks had formed, and no amount of polished promotion could hide them. This wasn't just performers clashing. It was two worlds colliding, and neither was ready for the impact. As filming continued on Four Christmases, the quiet tension between Reese Witherspoon and Vince Vaughn was no longer a secret. Even people outside the production could feel it. Extras whispered about the strange silence on set. Makeup artists avoided asking questions, and camera assistants moved around with unusual caution. Nobody wanted to stand too close when things finally snapped. And that moment came much sooner and much louder than anyone expected. It happened during what was supposed to be a simple exchange scene. No shouting, no physical comedy, no dramatic tears, just the two stars delivering lines while sitting across from each other at a kitchen table. Reese came into the studio early, ready as always, her script neatly laid out with notes scribbled in the margins. She had rehearsed her beats, refined her timing, and found the emotional pulse of the moment. Vince, on the other hand, walked in late, coffee still in his hand, laughing with two crew members about a joke he planned to throw into the dialogue. Reese overheard the joke. It wasn't in the script, and she instantly felt her stomach drop. When the director called action, Reese delivered her first line exactly as written. Calm tone, delicate gesture, clear purpose. Then Vince opened his mouth, and every word he spoke was an improvised rewrite. The rhythm shattered instantly. Reese blinked, confused. She tried again, attempting to salvage the scene. But Vince did it again. Another round of improv, another miscue, another emotional beat destroyed. The director yelled cut. A heavy silence fell. Reese set her script down, stood up, and walked straight off the set without saying a word. Everyone watched her leave, stunned. A lighting assistant whispered, "This is going bad." Another replied, "It's already bad." Reese isolated herself in her trailer for nearly 40 minutes. No movement. No sound. No messages sent. She just sat at her table, staring at her script, wondering how something she once believed in had turned into a nightmare. She respected Vince's talent, but to her, talent needed discipline and she saw none. Meanwhile, Vince was pacing the other side of the studio, frustrated and furious. He didn't understand why she couldn't loosen up, why she acted like he was ruining her career, why every change he made felt like a personal attack to her. To Vince, movies were alive. They breathed, evolved, shifted from moment to moment. He believed Reese's rigid professionalism turned filmmaking into a cage. When Reese finally returned, the director gently asked them to talk privately before continuing. They stepped aside to a dim corner of the set, Reese with her arms folded, Vince with his jaw clenched. Witnesses swore they never heard shouting. No voices raised. No cursing. But what they did hear was far worse. Cold, calm honesty. Reese told Vince she felt undermined. That improvisation wasn't playful, it was sabotage. She explained that she built her performance through careful emotional preparation. When he changed lines, it ruined her work. She said she deserved respect, not surprises. Vince replied without hesitation. He said scripts were guidelines, not commandments. He argued that the audience deserved authenticity, not memorized sentences. He said improvisation made scenes real, and if she couldn't adapt, maybe she was the problem, not him. That last line changed everything. Reese's expression froze, then hardened. She whispered, "That's exactly why we can't work together," turned around and walked back to set. Vince remained standing there, stunned, watching the distance between them grow into something darker. From that day forward, every crew member knew there was no coming back. The friendship everyone expected never formed. Instead, the movie became a battlefield of tension hidden behind professional smiles. They stopped laughing between takes. They didn't sit together during breaks. They refused interviews side by side. Hollywood tried to silence the whispers. But insiders later admitted the atmosphere became so toxic that multiple scenes were rewritten just to keep Reese and Vince physically separated. If the script once called for intimacy, it was altered. The tragedy was simple. Reese admired Vince's success, and Vince admired Reese's discipline, yet admiration turned to resentment because they could not understand each other. And with every passing day, the distance widened. The film would eventually be released to massive audiences, millions laughing at comedy they never knew was born from conflict so real, so raw, and so painful. But here, during those days of filming, the truth was unmistakable. Two Hollywood giants were becoming enemies. And the world had no idea when filming moved into its final weeks. What had once been a private tension between Reese Witherspoon and Vince Vaughn suddenly escaped the walls of the studio. Hollywood is a town built on whispers. Once they begin, they never stay small. One assistant leaked a sentence to a friend. That friend shared it at a party. Within days, word spread across Los Angeles that 4 Christmases had become a war zone behind the camera. Reese was the first to feel the sting. Tabloids began reaching out for comments, offering wild theories, everything from secret feuds to claims that she was jealous of Vince's improvisational talent. To her, these rumors were not just lies. They were painful attacks on the very reputation she worked so hard to build. She had spent her entire career showing kindness, professionalism, and emotional intelligence. Suddenly, headlines painted her as difficult, controlling, even cold. It cut deep. Vince, ironically, wasn't suffering in the same way. His public persona was always messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. Rumors about on-set tension didn't hurt him, they fed into his legend. He laughed off interviews, joked about creative clashes, and made it seem like everything was wildly exaggerated. That difference in response became a new wound in their relationship. Reese watched Vince remain calm and casual, acting as if nothing mattered. Meanwhile, she stayed awake at night, replaying scenes in her head, worried the world might believe she was the villain. Crew members recalled seeing her sit in silence during lunch breaks, staring at the floor, shoulders tight with stress. The emotional strain turned physical. Makeup artists noticed her hands shaking during early morning call times. A wardrobe assistant remembered Reese whispering, "I can't breathe today," before stepping in front of the camera. She wasn't weak, she was drowning in a situation she never saw coming. Then came the turning point. A scene that changed everything. It was supposed to be the big romantic moment of the movie, a kiss between Reese and Vince, meant to show their characters reconnecting. The energy on set was already fragile, but this kiss felt impossible. The script called for tenderness. The tension between them made tenderness unthinkable. Reese requested that intimacy coordinators be present, not because she feared Vince, but because she needed boundaries. She needed structure she could trust. Vince didn't take it well. He believed 2 professional actors shouldn't need referees. That disagreement led to an uncomfortable silence hovering over the studio like fog when cameras rolled. The director hoped professionalism would overcome discomfort. Reese stood in position, shoulders straight, breathing slowly, trying to enter the emotional space the scene required. Vince approached. Scripted lines ready, but his voice carried stiffness and edge. They leaned in. The kiss lasted less than 2 seconds. The moment it ended, Reese stepped back quickly and whispered, "We're done." She wasn't talking about the scene, she meant the entire experience. Everyone in the room felt the truth in her voice. After the take, she walked to her trailer, closed the door, and cried. Not because she hated Vince, not because the scene went wrong, but because she realized she had lost the joy of filmmaking, something she once loved more than anything. Acting had always been her escape, her passion, her identity. Now it felt like prison bars. Meanwhile, Vince stood alone on set, staring at the floor. Crew members later claimed he looked defeated for the first time. He finally understood the weight of everything that happened. Improvisation didn't feel exciting anymore, it felt like the knife that cut their partnership apart. Producers threatened to cancel the scene completely. Editors worked overtime to stitch together pieces without showing the lack of chemistry. Publicists drafted statements claiming everyone was thrilled with production. But behind every polished interview was fear the truth would surface. When the movie finally wrapped, Reese didn't attend the cast dinner. She left quietly, slipping into the night with her script under her arm, offering no goodbye to the man who had once been billed as her perfect on-screen counterpart. Vince stayed, drinking with the crew, laughing loudly, pretending nothing was broken. But those who watched him closely saw something different in his eyes. This wasn't two actors who merely disagreed. This was a relationship shattered by misunderstanding, ego, creativity, insecurity, pressure, fear, and pride. Fans would later wonder why Reese and Vince never worked together again. They would ask why promotion interviews showed distance, why smiles felt tight, why praises sounded rehearsed. The truth was simple. The experience changed both of them forever, and the world still hadn't heard the final twist, something that would flip every rumor upside down. When filming ended on 4 Christmases, Hollywood assumed the damage between Reese Witherspoon and Vince Vaughn was permanent. The tension was too exposed. The rumors were too loud. The wounds were too obvious. But what the world never knew was that something much deeper had been happening beneath all the friction. Something that almost no one, not even fans, could have imagined. It began months later, long after the cast interviews were finished and box office numbers were announced. Reese retreated from the spotlight, diving into new projects, trying to rebuild her confidence. But the emotional toll of that production stayed with her. Her friends noticed she was quieter, more withdrawn, and far more protective of her work. She spoke rarely about the film, and when she did, she chose her words carefully. She didn't want to relive the pain, but it was Vince who surprised everyone first. In an interview years later, he finally opened up, not by blaming Reese, but by admitting something few expected. He knew he was difficult to work with. He confessed that he had always struggled with structure and pressure. He revealed that improvisation wasn't just artistic freedom, it was a shield. A way to hide insecurity. A way to avoid judgment. A way to stay safe in a world that terrified him more than anyone knew. That confession changed the story. People began to understand that the tension wasn't about ego or disrespect, it was about fear. Vince feared failure, Reese feared chaos, and the collision of those fears became explosive. And there was a second twist. One Hollywood insiders kept buried for years. Reese actually admired Vince more than she ever let on. She once told a friend during filming, "He can be brilliant. I just don't know how to meet him where he is." That single sentence summed up their tragedy. Two gifted people trying to work side by side, never realizing they were fighting for the same thing, excellence. Over time, something else happened that almost no one believed. Reese and Vince apologized to each other privately. Not through agents, not through managers, not through lawyers, but through a quiet, personal conversation at a charity event where both unexpectedly crossed paths. According to someone present that night, Reese walked over first. She stood near him for a moment before speaking, her voice soft, controlled, sincere. She said she never meant to hurt him, that she respected his work, that she wished the experience had been different. Vince listened. Really listened. And then, with surprising humility, he told her he was sorry, too sorry for the improvisation she never wanted. Sorry for dismissing her preparation, sorry for misunderstanding her intentions. They didn't become friends after that. They didn't start calling each other, and they certainly didn't rush into another film together. But the apology ended the story the way their film never could, with clarity instead of silence. As fans continued debating what really happened, only Reese and Vince understood the truth behind their feud. Neither was the villain. Both were victims of pressure, timing, and the impossible expectations of Hollywood. But the biggest revelation came even later. Through someone who knew them well, they actually respected each other more after the conflict than they ever did at the start. Reese once said in an interview, not naming Vince directly, that the hardest people to work with sometimes teach you the most. Vince hinted in a podcast that actors who challenge him force him to grow. Those two comments were never linked publicly, but anyone who listened closely could hear the connection. The world saw headlines about fights, disagreements, silence, and hostility. But the real story was far more human and far more emotional. Two careers collided under the weight of expectation, and while the movie succeeded, The people inside it struggled more than fans will ever truly understand. Reese continued her journey, reshaping Hollywood with her production company, championing women's stories and building a legacy stronger than ever. Vince carved his own direction, balancing family life with his unpredictable screen presence. Their paths rarely crossed again, but they no longer needed to. The truth about Reese Witherspoon and Vince Vaughn wasn't that they hated each other. It wasn't that they were impossible to work with. It wasn't that one destroyed the other. The truth was simpler. They were human. They carried wounds, dreams, fears, flaws, expectations, and insecurities into a shared space, and the